Hi, hello. This is Mark Delgros. I should be audible. I am not captioned, however, because captions, for whatever reasons, do not give a caption source. So let's fix that. Caption source. How about that one? That seems like a good caption source. Or Richard source. Sure, captioning, whatever floats your boat. Okay, so I'm live here. I should be also live on YouTube if that is your preferred way of listening to it, because there are lots of people have different ways that they watch streaming shows, and some ways are more accessible than others. So I will warn that the captioning on our Twitch stream is slightly better. It's using Google Cloud Translation, whereas ironically the captioning we're doing through YouTube uses whatever automatic captioning system that YouTube uses, which I'm not 100% certain is that good. It's okay. Um, but if you see the phrase laurel link, as in the thing you wear at the end of it, basically you get put on your head if you want to race in the Greek Olympics, that means I'm saying lower link, the name of the application. That's just one thing I've seen a lot. Oh, lower link this time. Cool. Thanks. Okay. I am assuming that I am alive, visible, not visible. I am audible. I will make myself visible. Hi, look, there's OBS. You can tell I'm dealing with OBS issues. Let me close that. Now I should be visible and should be audible. And hi, basically, welcome to December, holiday month. Basically, year end, lots of crazy things happening, and Lorelink is no exception to all of that. We've had a very busy couple of weeks, as you may have noticed if you have followed our streams and, well, followed the fact that, am I very quiet? I at some point managed to quiet myself. I will attempt to speak clear. I can raise the volume. Am I louder or softer now? If I'm softer now, I don't know what to do. Um, because I just raised the volume on my microphone in OBS. That's louder, but still quiet. Okay. Um, okay. That is all the way up to the top there. At some point, something, maybe it's voice mod. Maybe it's voice mod. Testing again to see if my voice is louder and clear. Still clear at this point. Much better. Okay. Awesome. Awesome. Thank you very much, both of you. Appreciate your input. Okay. So, basically, this has been a busy series of weeks here at Lorelink. Um, basically, back in July and August of June, July, and August of this year, we ran a Kickstarter, which you may or may not be aware because we have been mentioning it on and off once or twice, to basically gather crowdfunding and essentially get people um, interested in basically talking about Lorelink. And just this week, Saturday, actually Monday, basically Saturday, we started with a few. And then on Monday, we opened the floodgates, as it were. And for those people who had completed their surveys, which they received from BackerKit, we have sent out basically access codes to Lorelink. So Lorelink is now open for early access. So that has been consuming the last couple of basically my last couple of days, weeks, as it were. And so we've gotten everything in. We have fixed bugs. We have, of course, found new ones. We have cleaned things up. We have polished things. We have tried to get everything neat and tidy and ready, and make sure that all the codes would go out and be delivered. Um, and so we have successfully done that. People are in. People are using Lorelink. We are getting feedback, which is awesome. That's what we want. We want to hear what's good. We want to hear what's bad. We want to hear what works, what's missing. Because we know that this is when we called it early access, it was done for a reason. Lorelink is by no means a finished, complete 100%. We're just dusting our hands off, dropping it off, then walking away from it product. Um, LoreLink is basically is a living product. If we are going to, but the if we are going to offer this as a service, which basically currently the plan is that basically it is a service. It is a it's a living no basically it's a reoccurring basically it's a reoccurring payments or yearly payments. And I know a lot of people are like, oh, I don't want to do that. I'd much rather pay it once and download it. It is understandable. We have offline options for things, basically for things like that. But the reason why we have a reoccurring payment system is because we do view it as a living product. We view it as something that is going to change. That is not a one and done. We hand you the product, we walk away from it. Um, Basically, those payments are basically the reoccurring payments are used to keep the upkeep on basically cloud-based functions, as well as to basically make improvements, make changing, because of the fact that we view that this is a conversation between us and all of the people who are using LoreLink. And so basically, as such, um, we want to get that feedback. We want to have those discussions. We want to hear, hey, yes, it works great for this, but I was trying to use it for Champions or Doctor Who or L5R or one of those other systems. And in order for it to really work there, I need this, or I notice these things don't really work as well. Or, hey, this does basically what the way I access LoreLink is through this device and it doesn't work as well. And that could be something as simple as basically on my phone, on my tablet, on my iPad, on my laptop, or it could be on the way I use it through my screen reader or some other device like that. Because again, the whole purpose behind LoreLink is to create an accessible campaign creation tool. We're not just creating it for ourselves. We're not just creating it for a very simplified, yeah, it works on our computer, so we're good. What the heck is L5R, by the way? L5R is short for Legend of the Five Rings. It is a role-playing system that was created by Alderac Entertainment back in the early 2000s, possibly late 90s, but definitely early 2000s. And it is essentially set in a fantasy version of a land that looks a lot like Japan. That's Kirk does a reaction. Oh, awesome, cool. It's a very enjoyable system. I enjoy the way that it is definitely a system which is focused more on interactions between characters and role playing, and less necessarily just about going into a dungeon and killing things. And it sets up interesting situations but it does them in a much more. It is a supernatural type setting, but basically, whereas basically the other system I'll kind of compare it to is Vampire the Masquerade, in terms of systems where they set up different groups and your character belongs to a group, and because they belong to their group, they don't necessarily have the same motivations as the rest of the group. Or therefore there's going to be a little push and pull between them while trying to get the mission objective completed. All that to say, LoreLink is now available. Early access is now open. So, basically, stay tuned. Basically, we have a Discord server. It is up and running, which is also part of that Kickstarter. We will likely but you may be asking, well, basically, what if I'm still interested in LoreLink, or what if I watch this today and I want to join? I would love to give you money. And we're like, that's great. We would love to take your money. But at this time, we are currently kind of in between phases, as it were. We're basically working with the group that we have. We're getting their feedback. We're improving the product, and then we will open it up again to a larger audience after that point. That's not to say there won't be chances or opportunities. We have access codes, and as we build up more of a social presence, we will likely run kind of campaigns and giveaways and things like that to encourage others to join. basically join LoreLink and basically chances to join the Discord server and things like that as time goes on. So, all of that to say, it's been a busy couple of weeks. And so, basically, we're kind of we've entered the holiday season, and so we're we picked out so what do I want to run, plan, and there's really the holiday season is basically well known for like the last 10 or so years. There's been basically Doctor Who and the holidays have kind of been kind of closely tied with each other. They've been a holiday special that they tend to run around the 25th of December. They've run Christmas specials. They've also run New Year's specials. Like the last couple of years, they ran some New Year's specials as well. So it's kind of tied up that in line. And of course, this is the 65th, 70th, 60th anniversary. It is the 60th anniversary. The previous anniversary was the 50th. This is the 60th. So this is the 60th anniversary of Doctor Who. It was been on the air since the 1960s. For those of you who are not familiar with it, it is a British television show that aired in the 1960s. That basically started the adventures of a old man and his granddaughter who had a time machine that had been strangely disguised as a British police box. It was low budget, but had a big heart and was basically had a great enjoyment in terms of revisiting history and having great adventures and things like that. Two decisions that they made elevated it from just what would have been just another silly little British television show, a science fiction show that has been lost to time, and has changed it into a show which has basically lasted 60 years. One was they started to introduce some very interesting reoccurring villains in the form of the Daleks, who are great metallic robot machines that spoke in almost monosyllabic, and basically giving only frightening demands such as exterminate. Yes, exactly. And chase people down hallways and corridors. That instantly latched into people's imaginations and terrified children and had them hiding behind the couches, basically as their parents watched the show. The other choice that they made is that when it came time for the lead actor, William Hartnell, basically decided that he was done. They decided that they weren't done with the show, that the show still had life in it. And that basically, in order to continue the show, they decided that since their character was already kind of a weird time traveler from a different planet or race or something like that, they could just fudge a little bit and say that he regenerated and turned into a completely different person, or at least appeared to be a different person, which in this case was... basically, my brain has actually skipped on the name of the second Doctor, and I am so embarrassed. Oh, no. Second Doctor is Hartnell, Pertwee. Why can I never remember the second Doctor? Troughton. Thank you. There it is. Basically, Patrick Troughton basically replaced William Hartnell as the second Doctor. And they decided and so they continued the show from there, and the show continued to be popular. They continued. I couldn't remember it either. Like, I could have given you a description. It's the guy with the recorder and the kind of Beatles bowl cut haircut. He's got the suit and the tie. I can remember all of those things, but I couldn't remember the name Troughton. Oh well. But in any case, so they decided the show could continue. They introduced more enemies that became basically staples of British sci-fi television horror: the Cybermen, the Ice Warriors, And basically it went on for years and years and years. And basically the Doctor, basically whenever the actors, basically the cast of the show never really basically stayed the same. Um, Basically there was always new actors in as the Doctor. There would sometimes be actors that would come in as his companions as they became to know, and those would stay or basically stay for a while and then either be dropped off by the Doctor or killed or decide to leave, um, or lost in other circumstances. And as the time went over, basically many popular, basically many classic actors, basically popularized by Tom Baker, the Fourth Doctor, really kind of cemented its popularity. And the show has gone on since then for over 60 years, with a brief weird gap in the middle where they ran out of budget, or basically the TV audience basically they ran out of budget and audience, and so the show went off the air. Basically after the Seventh Doctor, it got briefly revived by Fox of all people, with an Eighth Doctor, who sadly basically got a fairly terrible Fox TV movie, but enjoyed the role so much and was willing and dedicated enough to keeping it alive that he worked with another company called Big Finish to produce audiobooks. And basically they produced audiobooks of the Eighth Doctor's adventures, so while it was not on the air, it was still alive. Basically in audiobooks, comic books, books, all of those things kind of kept it alive. And so it was basically, and then it was rebooted in the late 2000s, with Christopher Eccleston, and new showrunners, basically new showrunners who had grown up with the show and were fans of the show. Russell T Davies and Stephen Moffat and Chris Chibnall came in and have basically produced more Doctors. And so it is basically considered to be the longest running, one of the longest running British sci-fi television shows, if not continuous, then at least basically having a steady through line. And basically, which brings us to what we're talking about today, which is, of course, the fact that at various points they have, of course, because you have something running for 60 years, during the RPG craze, basically as TTRPGs have gotten bigger, obviously someone was going to go, oh, hey, we have this really big science fiction property, we should make something of it. And so it's had a couple of different role-playing games. But today we are talking about the second edition version of it, which is... Oh. 1 second. Acrobat? I love it when OBS just decides that it's not going to find things. It's fine. I like it. Makes my life easier. But basically the second edition of the game by Cubicle 7. So... There we go. That's huge on the screen. Shrink down a little bit. But basically the second edition of the role-playing game. They have basically available in Cubicle 7. You can still find the first, basically, it may still be, basically, I apologize today, it's been a little bit rushed, so I'm a little bit behind in my preparations for today's stream than I normally would be. But because of the fact that it is the 60th anniversary, basically not being silly, yes, and I do not have an affiliate link, so don't worry, I'm not sending you off to purchase something and I make money for it. I'm recommending this because it is a good way of getting books. And basically, if you are interested in Doctor Who, Humble Bundle is running a bundle of a bunch of the books, a bunch of the audiobooks, basically some of the role playing books, um, some of the source books and things like that. Um, so if if you're interested in it, it is available there. They basically do note that the version of the rule book that they're offering in the bundle is the first edition book. Um, and some of these sources that they're like the Doctor Who and the Einstein engine is technically the second edition, basically for the second edition of the book, the role playing system. There is also a D20 version of Doctor Who available called Doctors and Daleks. Haha, see what they did there. So if you are interested in basically you're interested in Doctor Who and you want to run it, but you're more interested in running it in a basically in a system that you're more familiar with, such as D&D fifth ed. Basically, they do have that available as well, and they tend to they have adventures and things like that, and conversions, and how to switch things back and forth between them. Um, so all that to say, what is the role playing game? So basically, it runs on a D6 system. I'm saying that basically my brain is running, basically trying to run ahead to make sure I don't say anything absolutely stupid, because I last looked at the basically the first edition, and then I'm like, oh wait, there's a second edition, and I picked that up, and now I've got both the first edition and the second edition stuck in my head, and I do want to make sure that I give you the information for the correct edition. Um, so basically in the game itself, that you're not necessarily running basically you can't all play the Doctor, as this little sidebar here says. Basically Time Lord, basically it is generally it kind of runs on the same thing as not 7C, it's Ars Arcanum, I think is the other system, where one player plays a fairly powerful wizard character, and the rest play companions or other things, basically support of that character. So that basically you have a character who is a little bit better prepared for basically more likely to understand the situation or things like that. But it isn't necessarily basically the fact that that character is the only character who's going to do anything or going to be able to act. It's just you're going to have one character who's going to necessarily kind of lead the adventure, um, kind of make the final calls on things. Basically, they're more likely to, basically, they're the character who you want to be the player who's more likely to show up on a given night, etc., etc. But they're going to lead the adventure, but the other characters are there to basically help the characters along, and basically help the adventure along, explore things, discover things, provide, basically take a look at things. Basically, as you got, of course, when you're rolling dice, there's always going to be, no matter how high your attribute and skill are, you're going to be situations where you're going to be like, aha, I rolled terrible, but the other companion's like, oh no, this is something I know about. Or basically the Doctor is always in a situation where he's basically like, I don't quite understand why humans would do X or Y, because he is a Time Lord, and therefore, even though the amount of time he has spent with humans, there's always going to be things which are going to baffle him or confuse him. And so there's always times when he is injured or regenerating, basically just regenerated, and so is confused, and so has to rely on his companions for help. It changes the dynamic up, but it is something that you need to consider for your group when you're choosing to run a game like this, is that when you're running a game system which is based on an existing property, you always kind of have to make decisions on how, are you running this as, basically, are you running this as, basically, are you running this as, basically, as a, 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 as essentially redos of the adventures? Are you going, basically, is the GM going to essentially take you through, this is the 12th Doctors, and this is their adventures, and we're going to replay episodes of the show. Only with, basically, we'll basically kind of maybe end up with a slightly different solution at the end. That works if you have one person who's running it, who's really familiar with it, and other people who are less familiar with it, who are playing it. That works out well for basically for those type of situations. If everybody is familiar with it, which is more likely to happen, if you're choosing to run something like this, you're running that situation, which is okay. So this is everybody. We with the internet at our fingertips, we have become really vastly kind of obsessed with the thing known as the canon. Okay, these things are the things that have actually happened in the basically and affect stuff and things like that, and therefore this is sacred, and you have to follow these rules. And basically, I say basically the internet age has made it more accessible. Meaning the fact that if you want to double check you want to double fact check something, you could just go to TARDIS Wiki or Memory Alpha if you're playing a Star Trek game. Or something along those lines, and look up the actual thing that actually happened and have that immediately. Back in the 80s and 90s, we had them too. There were fanzines, there were reference books and things like that. That were basically stories set in the universe, not the story of the show. Otherwise, you'd just be reading the scripts. Yeah, but it's the idea of the fact that if you have people who are less familiar with it, like this guy I have friends who really enjoyed basically the first couple of Doctors, but didn't enjoy as much of the way and the tone basically that later Doctors episodes, some of the writing in some of those shows, and so didn't really stop watching at that point. So they're really familiar with Doctor Who, but they don't know the 12th Doctor's adventures, or they don't know the 13th Doctor's adventures. And so by doing that, they're familiar with the concepts of the show. They know there's a doctor. They know the doctor has a police box, which is a time machine. But you're throwing basically you as a GM are basically taking those scripts and then presenting them to the players, and then letting the players kind of change the way that it works, change the outcome, and maybe get a different spin, a different tone to the episodes, because sometimes basically like, oh, this episode is very dark or something like that, and you're running it, and you're like, oh, I'm going to lighten it up. I'm going to make it a little bit lighter, a little bit less terrible. Maybe this time the Doctor pulls a little bit more out in the end. The Doctor succeeds a little bit more, because the game I'm running, we're a little bit more optimistic and things like that. It's slightly awkward. It's a little weird, basically, in terms of if you have a mixed group who has some seen it, some haven't. Again, it's very situational. In general, what you're going to end up with is you're going to want to set something in universe and then take it from there. The nice thing with a lot of these shows is that, with few exceptions, most of these shows have gaps of time where you can very easily just kind of hand wave and stick an adventure in. Like basically between this episode and this episode, basically the Doctor happened to drop off their companions, pick up some new ones, went on a brief adventures, and then eventually parted ways. If you have people who are really sticklers for the canon, or you just run your own adventures, you have your own regeneration of the Doctor, which is completely separate from that. Or you have a completely different, you just said basically you have different companions and things like that, and it's a kind of a what if type situation. Or you just set things in universe. You have basically there's like, oh no, he's basically this Time Lord is basically they're the only one remaining, and that's what the show says. You kind of hand wave that and says, yes, that's what they know, but in actuality, over here there was another one who's having different adventures, and basically you can have them interact if you want as a GM, or you can have them never meet and things like that. The point of running a adventure like this is that it is not just necessarily about playing the game. It is about creating stories in a universe that everyone has enjoyed. It's essentially, what's the point of fan fiction? Is what the question can go down to. It's like, you're just making stuff up. It's not actually real. Um, it's not true. Basically, it didn't happen in the show, therefore it didn't happen. But the point of fan fiction and things like that is to take your own spin on things, and basically every new episode of the show is fan fiction until it airs. I mean, basically the writers of the show sit down and they write an episode of it, and it sets the canon and things like that. And what they decide happens is what happens, and then they pay actors and basically people a lot of money to actually make it happen. Um, and now it's real because it's part of the canon because that they went through that effort. You're doing the same thing when you're running a game like this. You are writing an episode of the show. You are creating these things. You're creating these adventures and stories, and you're like to send it to be paid a lot of money, please. Yes, yes. That would basically when we find that sign up form, please let us know. That would be great. We'll have an entire. Well, all of us can sign up for that. But there's an entire basically everything you're doing is you're creating your own version of it. You're creating your own story, which is definitely worthwhile. That's why we game. It's why we create stories. Is that we're interested in we want these things. We want to create new things. We want to push things in different directions. We want to, and that's basically what the show has done. Basically, the show will push things in one direction and give answers to questions that they pose, and you'll push things in a different direction as a GM and answer different questions. Basically, you will create different scenarios and basically have that same kind of satisfaction in having that same fun in those universe, basically exploring those same ideas. And here's the fun fact, the fun part. A lot of those people who wrote those basically who do these things, who create these non-canon fan fictions and things like that, are the people who end up working on the show later. RTD and Stephen Moffat and Mark Gatiss and Tris Chibnall are all people who were great fans of the shows when they were kids growing up at 60 years old. You have people who have literally grown up with the show, and they made fan films. There are basically the examples exist out there of Moffat and Gatiss creating basically low budget fan films, basically of their own designs with their own scripts that they created, and then they went on to actually create actual episodes and things like that. So don't let anybody tell you that you're wasting your time with creative efforts just because you're working in a universe which belongs to somebody else. If it is that is what basically starts your creative energy going, awesome, great. Basically if you go on basically then and you're like, oh hey, basically you may go on from that and create actual things which are basically actually part of the thing. You may take those ideas and spin them off in their own direction and basically go, oh hey, if I change the names on these things, basically my universe is diverged enough that it's kind of separate, then now it has an homage, I'm going to create my own thing, and now you have your own thing which other people will enjoy, because much like there are other people out there much like you who enjoy those things. And basically when you're GMing it, you have that audience built in already. You're creating your own thing. Basically your universe basically has different challenges for the Doctor, except things like that. And you have a lot more freedom when you're running a game than you do when you're running a television show. You have infinite budget because you're using your imagination. You have a smaller writing staff. It's just you, but it's just you and your players who are much like even more so than the actors in the show, have input into how the show works, how things works, how things plan, how things happen, and you're building that exciting adventure with them. And so you can start simple, like basically looking at what I'm pulling from, probably planning for the next campaign. I'm gonna pull a short adventure that they've probably started. The neat thing about basically Doctor Who, so basically talking about Doctor Who and moving it into lore link, which is So what we're here about, basically we're here to talk about that. One second. Excuse me. Okay. Um, is Doctor Who basically there are a number of different ways that you can run something like this because Doctor Who basically, if you're going off of what the TV series is, uh, you have kind of you have kind of multiple options for how you want to construct your campaign. You may run it as just a one shot, which works basically. Doctor Who will work great for that because the structure of the show that everyone's familiar with, you kind of come into it expecting that basically you have a basically it's going to be a short kind of one shot adventure. The Doctor and the TARDIS arrive, or these characters arrive because again, you don't have to play just the Doctor. You could be humans that get wrapped up in aliens and things like that that are from the series, or basically or it could be unit or torchwood, or you could basically you're not even limited to just human. You could do basically some of the outside or basically maybe the Jadoon if you're doing a Jadoon patrol, which is out doing bounty capturing, basically capturing bounties and basically working for the Shadow Proclamation and things like that. Uh, all sorts of exciting adventures that you can run, and all adipose adventure. Oh gosh, yes, you technically totally could. I mean, why not? It's just a bunch of little cute adipose who have been freed and need to make it back to basically they start on one side of London or wherever, and they need to make it across the city and face all the dangers that threaten the tiny adipose. Possibly aliens that want to capture them, or Ghostbusters who would decide that they look like little State Farm marshmallow men and want to capture them and throw them in boxes. All sorts of things you could do. But all of those things can basically you expect to be a basically kind of wrapped up before the end of the basically before the adventure ends. It starts, situation is described, basically you deal with basically you look into the adventure, and in one or two sessions you finish that episode up. um and then maybe basically then they basically you do a basically maybe you do a wrap up, maybe you do a credits thing, uh and you move on from that, and then you keep going, and you can keep building. As opposed to me, it's made something very different. Clearly, yeah, they're cute little tiny white creatures who come from a weight loss program. Let's just say. So, Doctor Who has some very interesting adventures. So basically, in terms of that, basically how I would run those type of things in, let's go ahead and let's create a let's upload an image here really quickly for this. Upload a new image. Let's upload an image of TARDIS. We'll just use that as our background for this adventure. Keyword TARDIS. Who. Blue British police box on a purple background. And then we'll add an image. Nope, I am not showing what I'm doing because I'm covering it. Boop. Yes, it is still somewhat related. Up, campaigns, Doctor Who, images, TARDIS. Look, there it is. There's the Blue British Police box. We'll save that. Okay, that's selected. Insert that. Select that for that as well. Insert that. Second edition. And then basically we can give it a brief description. Okay. Write introduction if we have one. We'll go ahead and save that. Then we have our background. And we can basically. So basically, how I would end up basically. So sessions are the easiest way to break things up into basically individual sections and things like that. Basically, sections and things like that, which are groups of sessions are groups of events, locations, characters, and it can be associated to parts of your timeline and things like that. And so I would use sessions to define these episodes because basically, if you're creating it either as a one shot, one episode, basically much like the current TV series, or if you're wanting to run it as a more like the original, basically when it first aired in the 1960s, it was a serial, meaning that each episode would end on a cliffhanger of sorts where the doctor would be in some kind of trouble or something like that, captured or something like that, and the next episode would pick back up and resolve from there and keep going until they reach the end of that, and then another cliffhanger would usually happen at the end of the next one, and the plot would advance from this. It would take 4 or 5 episodes to tell essentially a almost movie length or longer story. But it would be broken up into sections. So you could use that format for this, or you could do it as a proper campaign. Basically, you don't have to break it up into. Sorry, bumped the mic. You don't have to break it up into actual proper basically episodes and things like that. You can run like a more traditional campaign where it is one long-term adventure which is going on. Basically that doesn't really set itself for dungeon crawling necessarily, but you could do that. You could be trapped in basically in the heart of a Dalek maze or something like that. Your characters have to make their way through that, and basically the TARDIS has been lost, and you're running it as a more of a traditional thing where the system isn't as suited for that. Basically, the system is very definitely much more of a social type. Basically, you have things like awareness and coordination and ingenuity and presence and resolve. This game isn't a heavy combat system where there's a lot of different skills for doing combat, things like that. But if you're wanting to change it up and run something different than what you ordinarily see when you're running when you're watching the show, this is your chance to do that. You could do something that they couldn't get away with to get in the show in terms of let's set it up so that we have basically the doctor is stuck for a long time period without their TARDIS. Or basically, again, you're running a completely different type of adventure. You're running a unit squad who are responding to a situation where aliens have basically laid siege to a tower or something like that. Welcome back, Tony. And your team is going in to deal with the situation, or Torchwood, or things like basically you're having to deal with a secret invasion of Earth, and you're having to slowly take it apart without the Doctor's help. As that kind of is the theme of Torchwood. But basically, so these sessions are going to be kind of key to building out that kind of. If you're building a more episodic structure, these sessions are going to be key, and you can build them out and be like episode 1, and maybe it's part 1. Or if you're running a serial, basically you have a serial 1, and you can do that. If you're running things as a serial, actually you can't tag. But if you tag things in episodes, and if you build things out as episodes, so the Terror of the Daleks. So you could set it up like that. You can then you could add events and things like that which are going to happen. You can set up the location where that's going to happen. Add your characters and things like that. And as you're building all of that out, maybe you want to in order to keep track of everything you're putting into this episode, maybe you either label this as Terror of the Daleks, maybe you label this as Terror of the Daleks. We'll call it episode 1 here. Or you flip it depending on how you want to do it. basically items related to the first episode of the campaign. And so now inside of here, I can tag all of the things which are related to that episode. So if I want basically if I'm wanting to create Daleks and I'm going to create the creature, and I'm going to create basically Dalek Scout. Then I'm going to fill out all the information about Dalek Scouts, and I'm going to I can come up here and I can add a tag, and I can tag them as part of that. And I can have a planet that I create. Scavros. Let's see. Birthplace of the Daleks. I think it's the planet of the Daleks. I can't remember if it's their birthplace or not. That's the problem with getting obsessed with things like canon and things like that. So you have something like this, you create that, and you want to tag that as being part of episode, basically part of that episode. And that basically, because you do that, because you're doing things like that, if I start a new episode and I have another one, which is either basically, I clicked the wrong button there. If I have an additional episode that comes later, then basically like the Return of the Daleks episode, I can tag it so I can notify that, oh, I've used this in multiple episodes if I'm planning this out in advance. Because what you could do with like a Doctor Who campaign might be one of the things that they talk about in the book, and they built out some of their adventure books this way, is you have a series of 10 mostly unrelated episodes that you seed things throughout, much like basically if you're running more of a RTD type of basically Russell T Davies, like the early reboot stuff, where you are running a series of episodes which are disconnected in nature. They are basically, they have their own plots. They are done in an episode or two, but there are things basically things seeded throughout them that hint that there's something bigger going on. Basically, first season, basically for the first series is Bad Wolf. Yeah, basically the Shadow Proclamation and Torchwood were kind of mystery boxes that they had from other series and things like basically from other series seasons and things like that. The Flux, that's another one that they introduced. Timeless Child, things like that, where they seed things in, but they don't necessarily require you to run things basically from 1 to 10 in a certain setup. You can if you want to run it that way, but maybe you have a group where people are more likely to drop in and out. Basically, so this week you have these 3 people, and the next week maybe you'll have 5 people, 2 of which are the same people from other weeks. And you can build your series, your series around that, and mark that so everyone regroups, and basically they get to return to home base. And basically, if you're doing a unit thing, this for this week, these 2 are off on assignment, so they're not here. But these 3 are going out on this episode's thing. The Doctor drops his companions off and picks up some new ones. Some stay, some leave. Is basically a way if you're doing it with you're using a Time Lord as a base, and basically a time machine type thing. All of those, basically you could build all of that kind of out in here. And so you build these episodes out as kind of chunks, and by using the tag system and the session systems, you can easily find the things that you want to be associated with them. Basically tagging them, that basically makes it easy for you to recall, where have I used this before. So if you're like, oh, I'm in the middle of Return of the Daleks, and I'm like, right, I used this in Terror of the Daleks, let me go back to this Terror of the Daleks session, look it up, see what happened in there, maybe basically make note of things that they may have left unfinished. Because if I go into sessions, sorry for bumping that again, basically I'm going to go into sessions, I'm going to like I may associate an event. I'm going to create, basically maybe there is basically an event where basically it's the basically things like that. Maybe I have a villain that they're dealing with in here. Can't create new game objects. That is a known bug. I know if I create a new game object, it's going to error out on me. But basically, like locations, basically they create a sewer base and things like that. So I can have all of these things and I can mark them as whether or not they're completed or not. And so if there are plot hooks that I put, if I build this episode out, because you're going to build this episode out and you're going to kind of loosely put together, okay, basically they arrive, here's the trouble, what is going on, they need to escape this place, they need to rescue this, they need to stop this doomsday weapon, etc., etc. And then you're probably going to have some minor subplots throughout it. Basically, like, okay, there's this group of civilians here, they want to basically they need to rescue. There is this rival time lord who's basically there's this other agent basically who seems to be is helping or hindering and things like that, and you're going to build all those hooks in, and you may not get to all of them, or you may touch on some of them but they never get resolved, or they don't get resolved all the way. And so you're going to want to keep track of those, and those basically things which are done you can mark as completed. And basically you're going to say that, so when I come back, when I'm working on Terror of the Daleks, I can come back to, or basically Return of the Daleks, I could come back to Terra and be like, oh yeah, they did deal with the betrayal of Adric, but they didn't really get to the Dalek secret base, so I can reuse that in Return of the Daleks. Or they dealt with the betrayal of Adric, but Adric is still out there, and so I want to make sure that I deal with that. Or if there are basically in things that I want to include in a future episode, I can just select it here. Was selected. I'm like, oh, you know what? It didn't happen in this episode, so I'm going to clean it out. I'm going to move it to a new session. I'm going to move it to the return to, let's call that episode 5. Return of the Daleks. And I'm going to save that out. And so now, basically, now it is gone from here, but if I go into sessions, I now have episode 5 in here. And that location is in here, not marked as completed, and it's all set up. So it's all ready to go, things like basically ready to go for me. So that can help, basically, that can help me build up future episodes. That can help with my planning as I look at things and I go, yes, I want to include these things. No, I don't want to include these things. That's right, we did that. We didn't resolve that, etc., etc. And so all of that can be built in here. Basically, the creating templates, basically templates are something else that would be definitely kind of useful if you're planning on building out similar plot arcs in your things. And so you want to make sure that, what is the GM called this one? Is it still called Game Master? I believe, yes, it is still called Game Master in this system. They basically they didn't give it a fancy name in this one. Basically, I still think Mother is probably Game Mother is probably the best one from Alien. Let's basically so you can use basically the session system to build these out, and your events and your locations and your characters are basically essentially you're kind of basically if you're creating this, you're essentially thinking of it as kind of a script, and your basically your locations and your characters and creatures or villains are your locations and your plot, your items, your things like that, and your events are your plot beats, your basically your rising and falling action and things like that. That helps you put all of that together. Now, timelines is probably the last thing, which, as you might suspect, from a basically for a series show that is about time travel, timelines are probably going to come into play. But basically, there are multiple ways timelines can work. Basically, the most basic way is you have the main timeline, which is just how your campaign is progressing. Basically, what order are events happening in your timeline. You might have a timeline per episode. Maybe you want to create a new timeline and it's episode 1's timeline, and that will help you sort out exactly what happens in episode 1 and what are the plot beats you expect to happen. So maybe you create an event which is basically like basically if you're wanting to just keep it basically start, and you're going to create one full basically you're going to create a starting one, well, rising action, we're going to create one for climax. And this is all very simplistic. You'll probably be giving it better names than this, but basically climax, and then basically Terror of the Daleks. Epilogue. I'm going to spell epilogue incorrectly. And then I'm going to use the fact that I'm in the 21st century and have a spell check. So I'm going to create all of that, and then I'm going to come to the episode 1 timeline. And I'm just going to associate events. And I'm going to go through start. Rising action. Put that in index 1. Climax. Put that in index 2. You know, I keep scrolling back down. I really just have to click it here. Episode. And there. Basically, simple, straightforward, basically kind of straightforward timeline of this is what I want to happen. Basically, these are the plot beats, and this is the general order I want them to happen in. So if I come over here and I look at it, I can quickly just go to the events and happen. Basically look at it. Basically, if I go to the timeline main page, you'll see there's this main timeline thing here, and I can either have that as a basically if I'm doing it as a main timeline, maybe I include associated timeline. Oops, I don't have to do it down here. I can do it up here. And I'm going to associate episode 1, and that's going to be the start. And then maybe I'm going to add basically additional events and timelines. Don't know why that disappeared. We'll have to look into that. Why did you go away? But normally there would be a circle here. We'll figure that out. Basically, but you'll be able to look through all of your, basically you'll have your timeline of what episode, what order your episodes happened in. Because again, we're talking about this being episodic, meaning you can plan out a bunch of adventures in advance, you can throw down a bunch of plot hooks, get all your planning done, basically things like that. And then when you come to the table, and you can leave that, you can put that in your session descriptions here. You can have a description of best for 2 to 3 players. Needs to have the Time Lord and at least one future companion. So that you know, okay, basically who's showing up at today's session. Cool, that's the adventure I'm going to run, is this one, and I have all of my notes, all of my items associated together. I named it similar so I can go to timelines, and I can see the fact that timeline is associated. Basically, I can the episode, and if I want to actually associate a session with a timeline, I can associate it here. If I want to, so basically I can either put it at the beginning and have it actually have its own index, or I can have it be basically I can associate with an interval, with a set of events, which is what this is here. You can see you can associate a session with a series of events. So if I say this interval is 0 to 4, length, I could say that. That way, basically, this could be if I need to break up an episode, and basically if I plan out an episode and it's 2 parts, I could use the interval to be like, basically part 1 and part 2, and I can associate those sessions so I know how much got done in one session with that, which helps when I come back later and I'm planning future stuff, and I'm like, how much stuff can this group actually get through? Let me go back and look. Oh, okay, I dumped way too many events and characters and things like that in this one, and they only got 2 steps into my plot before we had to call it. Okay, I need to either basically, so for my next one, I need to basically parse things out, stretch it out so we can get through things in a longer thing. And of course, basically the last thing would basically, in terms of timelines, is just where are you on an actual timeline? Because if you have a game based on time travel, at some point you're going to have characters in part of timeline A, and you're going to have characters in part of timeline B. And they may be divergent timelines, which are springing off from the same thing, which means you have to associate them. Basically, you can associate multiple timelines from each other, or you're just keeping. Maybe it's just the fact that you want to write down and have in one place just for quick reference. Okay, when one basically here's a series of actual historic events that were happening that I want my players to be involved in. Okay, basically, Queen Elizabeth was crowned here. The Spanish Armada was here. The black, basically, Spanish Armada was during this. That's when this event happened. That's when this event happened, etc., etc. Basically, here is when this artist was working because I want them to interact with famous people, Da Vinci or basically Shakespeare, things like that. Let me put all of those things and throw them all onto a timeline so I can look at it and be able to go, okay, here's what's going on, and then I can use that let me go back to the other one. This interval can show basically I can use to be like, okay, that I can highlight, I can have an interval for these two, and basically I can call it basically what group A is doing, and I can have an interval over here for what these two people are doing, and that's what group B is doing, and I can use that to keep track of what group is dealing with what. So you can have all of that set up in this timeline, and just to make it easier reading for you, parsing and looking through it and looking through all of that, just so you could basically help a little bit of you keeping that straight. So you're not doing a lot of running around, searching through things, flipping through other pieces of paper. Sorry, I had to grab a drink there. So, all of that to say, oh, okay, good. I thought my clock was wildly off there. Okay. So basically that kind of episode, basically, and so if you're building out a Doctor Who adventure, I think basically all of that to say, it feels like make these decisions. Basically, session 0 is something that we basically is kind of become a commonplace term, but I feel like I should explain it just so basically not don't assume that everyone has heard of basically has been terminally online and knows everything. Basically, has spent time in forums, the same forums you have. Session 0 has become basically the idea of the fact that you all sit down as a group before you actually start playing the game. And and you decide in that session 0 what type of game it is you're playing. You set expectations. That is where some of the stuff when we were playing the Alien game, a lot of those game safety features come into play, in terms of making sure that all of your players are comfortable and you have an understanding of what everyone's limits are and what people want to be included and what people do not want to be included. So you plan all of this, you get that all planned out. And so especially in a popular culture, basically an existing source like this, where people are going to show up with different expectations, and it's good to get those basically known up front. Okay, we're going to run a campaign style Doctor Who adventure. We're going to be running humans only. We're going to be running aliens only. We're going to be running Time Lords only. However you want to set that up. And basically, we're going to run episodes and things like that. And basically, we're going to run a Doctor base. We're going to run adventures in the 12th Doctor's time period. That means the fact that basically you are committing to, if you're playing the 12th Doctor, you're committing to showing up on basically almost all of the sessions. Basically, are you okay with that? Basically, set up those expectations in advance. We're going to be running with this kind of thing. This is how we're dealing with canon, things like that. How we're dealing with outside knowledge, because even when you really know a group, session 0 is super important. Yes, because even if I know the group, basically the idea of basically how basically I don't necessarily know what people's expectations are around Doctor Who. Basically, maybe we played a lot of D&D, or maybe we played a lot of Blades in the Dark, or something like that. And even if I'm playing D&D, basically, if you're changing GMs, things are going to change. If you are basically, you're just changing characters in terms of basically how the group dynamic is set up, because people have expectations from the last game you played. Basically, it's like, oh, basically, it is likely to basically Wolf Mom. You're basically you are the obvious example of this. If I show up to a basically if I show up to a D&D game, I'm gonna be like, oh, I know Wolf Mom Gaming. I know the fact that uh they love playing basically werewolf characters, and so if there's a werewolf available, they're going to take that. I know the fact that they like playing cleric, so I'm just going to assume that they're going to play the cleric, and I'm going to bring the fighter or something like that, or I'm not going to take the cleric because I don't want to take that away from them. And Wolfmom's like, no, actually, I really wanted to try something else out. Don't force me into that box. People change, expectations change. Use session zero to establish those things. Basically, and he also established things like time commitments and things like that. Set that up. Basically, technology expectations, things like that. Basically, we're a group that meets every week, either basically in person, and if we can't meet in person, we will meet online. We're a group that meets every week, and if we can't meet, we will take a week off. That's fine. Basically, really in this time of my life, I can only really do a once a month type thing. Okay, basically set up those expectations. Use session zero to do that. Um, and then basically also work on stuff like characters and things like that, and basically build your world out in advance. I love that there's a lot of game systems out there now. um, Dresden is one that basically is one where I first kind of encountered it. There's lots of others out there that do it as well. Blades in the Dark is probably another one, um, where you establish the world you build the world together from the beginning. um, and that's what sets part of what basically all about good communication with the group. Yeah, yeah. Basically, this is a game all about basically tabletop RPGs is like to use the basically Japanese name is Table Talk, which is a great way of looking basically realizing, yes, this is a game where you cannot be silent and play this game. You have to communicate. Um, and as such, you have to deal with different people's methods of basically expectations of how communications happens, or how people know, like basically the basically what I was talking about, the X basically the X card system and player safety stuff is important because it's important to have a way of knowing when your players are uncomfortable. If you don't know them well enough to be able to look at a person and be like, oh, I can tell that you're basically you've gotten up from the table and you've gotten up and you're now drinking across, you're now spending a lot of time at the snack table. That means you're uncomfortable with the situation. I know that because I played with you a lot. um Basically, if I've never played with you before, even if it's just basically things, it's good to have a system to be like, hey, I need an easy way for you to be able to say, whoa, okay, no, let's stop what we're doing here and move on to something else. We have crossed a line. We have I'm uncomfortable with the situation. Basically, how do I communicate that? Is there a card? Is it I send a text message to the GM? Um, is it a hand gesture, or basically, or even basically, as much as I hate to say, basically, is it a word that I use in conversation? Basically, because I'm really sensitive to this thing, and I don't want other people to pick up on the fact that I just want this to be something between myself and the GM. Because basically, some people are going to be more comfortable. It's going to be like, I don't want to be confrontational because I don't want to be the one to ruin the situation. Which is, but we're all having fun and role playing, and I don't want to be the one to basically stand up and flash a card or something like that. Basically, make sure you understand what people's communications levels are. Basically, all that to say, expectations are important. Making sure that you are basically talking with your players and things like that. Everybody knows, especially when you're dealing with a known thing like this, where it can be very easy that people are going to come in with expectations that, unless you push them for it, unless you talk to them about it, you're not going to get. You are going to you're going to assume, oh yeah, we're playing Doctor Who. That means that someone's going to want to play the Doctor, and everyone's going to want to play companions, and they're going to be okay with the companions dying horribly because that happens in the show. Companions sometimes will get this situation where the Doctor will have to sacrifice the sacrifice of one versus the sacrifice of many, and it's epic and tragic and it's great, and I love that pathos, and I basically that's the emotional core of basically of Doctor Who, and that's why I feel Doctor Who should be all about. So I'm perfectly willing to kill off your characters. And you as the player are like, no, actually, wait, what? No, I'm here to play a role-playing game, and I like my characters surviving throughout. I've got enough death and tragedy in my actual life. I don't want to deal with that, basically, at the table. So, hey, can we not have that? Can we not do basically? Can we avoid that sort of thing? Or basically, I'm planning on this to be an epic Doctor Who adventure where the Doctor is trapped on a planet without their time machine. We're not going to have any time travel at all because I'm going to do something different. And you're like, no, actually, we all signed up for time travel adventures. I want to go see historic events, and I want to go. Basically, let's go kill Hitler. Basically, to paraphrase, basically to name a Doctor Who episode, and things like that. And so you're like, basically that's what I'm expecting out of this type of thing, is I want to be able to do that sort of thing. So session 0 is good for setting up those expectations, basically finding those things out, and that will help you when you're building campaigns out in LoreLink as well, to have that understanding. Note that just because it's a session 0, it doesn't immediately have to be followed by session 1. It is a setup session. It is a prequel. It may be that you set up session 0 because you're like, oh, hey, we're thinking about doing this. At the end of session 0, you go, hey guys, I don't think this is going to work. I don't think we all have wildly different ideas on how this game system works. And we've looked at the rules, we've built characters out, and none of us really like how this is. We don't like the vibe. We don't like the feel of this. We don't like how this is working. Okay, let's pick something else. Let's do something else. Maybe Traveler works better for the type of adventures we're wanting to run. Maybe Star Trek works better for the adventures that we want to run. Okay, cool. Let's reconvene and do that. And basically you move on. Basically you move on from that point, and you make your decision, and the GM knows that in advance, because it feels really bad for a GM to invest a ton of work, time, and effort into something, and then discover the fact that basically their expectations were wrong, and the players aren't really enjoying it, and you're just dragging everybody forward for weeks or months at a time until finally enough ennui or disgruntledness or whatever builds up, and it all collapses in flames, and all your work is for naught. Not great. Use session 0 to find these things out in advance and save yourself a lot of suffering. Okay, all of that to say, basically we have talked about a lot with Doctor Who. Basically we've used it to kind of talk about basically ways you can create campaigns in time, basically in LoreLink and things like that. So now it's, of course, a game fall apart because the party went sideways that its expectations at the beginning town would be wildly suspicious of them. Yeah, exactly. It's that basically, oh wait, I've walked into something completely different, and role playing is such a personal thing that basically you're playing characters who are you and aren't you at the same time, and so things that happen to them will affect the play. The things that happen to characters will affect the players. Basically, if they're totally dissociated, it's going to be it's not going to be as much fun, because hey, you want your people to have some vested interest in their characters, what happens to them. So, all that to say, basically, LoreLink, we are in early access as of now. So, basically, teachers don't got derailed. Yep. So, what are basically plans going forward from here? We are in the holiday months, which means the fact that there's probably not a whole lot. Basically, we're going to be doing probably regular streams, but we're not going to be ramping up too much. We're going to be talking. We have early access going on. We're going to be talking about LoreLink. We're going to be playing through an episode of Doctor Who probably next week. So tune back in here next Tuesday, starting at 5 o'clock, where the LoreLink team will be taking on a episode of Doctor Who. Uh, yeah, basically, well, I'm excited because I know we will have we'll have some players in that game who will have no clue what's going on, and there are some players in that game who will have every clue which is going on. And it's going to be an interesting mix to how to deal with all that stuff I've just talked about, in terms of making sure everything is set up in advance so that we do have a good, basically, a good 7 foot long scarf for next week. Exactly. Um, and so basically making sure that we basically have fun with that. And then after that, it's kind of up in the air. We will probably do something holiday related. Like the Doctor Who episode, maybe holiday related because hey, Christmas specials and Doctor Who go together. But maybe it's video games. Maybe it's basically maybe we'll do a holiday tune game again. Those are cool. And basically, or maybe we'll do something else completely. Likely, what you will see basically going forward is basically we're going to be doing more of these type of things now that we have things in early access. We're going to be basically trying to ramp up getting people interested and basically interested in Lore Link and getting more people involved and things like that. Now that we're starting to slowly build our community out, and so we're wanting to be part of that, and basically and help set expectations in that community and basically make ourselves available to them. So that is what is going forward. So if you're catching this just at the end, or you want to see more of stuff like this, we do have a YouTube channel. If you are interested in finding basically getting information about LoreLink and finding out if we're distributing codes or opening other things, opening early access up to more purchases or things like that, feel free to basically you can follow us on Blue Sky. We have a Facebook page. Or you can sign up for our newsletter, which is the easy way to get stuff delivered directly to you. You don't have to go out and look at it. You don't have to involve yourself in any social media sites, which are often terrible to deal with or may contain spoilers for things that you're trying to avoid, like Doctor Who, for example. And so the newsletter is monthly. Basically, our social media guy promises that because he doesn't want to have to deal with me giving him a newsletter more than once a month. It's already enough work to drag it out of me once. And so our codes would never spoil you. This family. And so all of those are great ways to stay informed in Lore Link and basically and find out basically more about it. And so all that basically like my brain is like there's something else because I'm so used to be like sign up for the Kickstarter, join early access, and back us there. But we are done with that for now. So that is all I have to say, other than join us again next week to see more Doctor Who, and we will catch you all later. Thanks.